followed by Camille Harris.
Mayor, council members, Council Member Brenner. I want to begin by reading a quote from Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. The first requirement of a sound body of law is that it should correspond with the actual feelings and demands of the community. You have before you a draft regarding substandard housing and amnesty programs. I want to address the amnesty portion of this program, which I believe is terribly deficient because it's too restrictive to whom amnesty is granted. Everyone who wants amnesty should be able to receive it. In staff's own document, under Amnesty Program, page 5, paragraph A, I've highlighted it for you. And Mayor Weir, you hit this one right on the head. This program, amnesty will only be provided to illegal dwelling units on owner-occupied parcels where the county assessor's office has record of the subject illegal dwelling having been placed in service. Well, how many citizens who would request amnesty have placed their units into service by registering them with the county's assessor's office? 10%? 5%? Maybe none. I'm sure city staff would testify that the majority of units qualify for amnesty, but how would staff know how many units in question are not registered with the county assessor's office? The fact is, staff doesn't know and can't know because they're not registered. Therefore, we're dealing tonight with a very restrictive draft amnesty document at best. It needs a panel of all stakeholder groups to amend. We need to get it right the first time.
Thank you, Tom. Camille. And Camille will be followed by Dan Cormode.
Hi, Camille Harris, VCORD. The change to proactive code enforcement is at odds with the proclaimed goal of ending homelessness. I predict it will increase homelessness and drive our elderly out of their homes. They do not have the money to meet the demands of the city. Proactive policy needs to be rescinded and returned to a complaint-based program. This program is so arduous and limited that it appears to be a 6-month token effort that allows the proactive code enforcement program to resume with even greater aggression. This is amnesty very few would or could do. One of the code staff wrote, "Amnesty then be nasty," unquote. 3 points defeat the stated goals of preserving safe housing. Venturans are automatically criminalized because the code declared all structures that do not comply with the code to be substandard and subject to fines and fees. That would be over half the city. The additional layers and restrictions over the states were not studied for their impacts on the community. The amnesty program only applies to second units that are already registered with the county. I would guess that to be less than 10%. This proposal requires citizens to incriminate themselves to be eligible without even knowing if amnesty will be granted. Now, code enforcement knows whom to go after. There's no provision to protect the property owner from retroactive enforcement of unpermitted improvements maybe done 30, 40, 50 years ago that may be cited during inspection of the property. The second unit needs inspection from a private home safety inspector. OHI has recommended an ombudsman for their program. What we suggest is a stakeholder committee to write a practical program that's comprised of citizen stakeholders and safety experts, both private and public. The owners and tenants should be represented by ombudsmen or citizens who have already been through the citation process. This committee needs to reform the 2007 city's requirements to today's reality. Stress kills, and
Okay, come in.
conforming to such arduous codes is causing enormous stress, especially to our seniors who live in the older properties.
Thank you, Camille.
And you need a 1-year period to comply with this.
Dan Cormode, and Dan will be followed by John Jones. Okay, I'm going to ask you to wave your hands instead of applauding. It's hard to hear what's going on when you're doing that. Sorry about that. You couldn't hear, right? I did say it. After Dan is John Jones, and if you appreciate what somebody's saying, we can see when you wave your hands just fine.
Evening, Mayor,
Thanks, Dan.
members of council, city manager, city attorney. Just some short comments. You got my email, I assume, that I sent on I believe it was Saturday. But there's some things I've heard tonight that bother me. The pictures that the building official have shown real substandard housing that needs to be resolved. But the problem is, if you read the 2007 City Property Maintenance Code, anything that does not comply with that code is considered substandard, including if you replace your water heater and never got a permit for it. So I think we need to quit playing around with the term substandard and make some realistic definition of it, whereas a water heater or a faucet don't make it substandard, but some of the conditions that are shown do make substandard housing. 2 years ago, you applied the 2007 building codes. Tacked to the bottom of it was a Ventura City Property Maintenance Code. I would recommend that you amend the municipal code to remove the Ventura City Property Maintenance Code from the municipal code and go back to the requirements of the state building codes that were referenced in the at that time. Last of all, I see the proposed resolution, which is very little talk about in the staff report. Adopt a policy to further support relocation payments due from residential owners to displaced tenants, subject to recovery from the responsible owner along with any applicable penalties. A lot of people in the community feel the only reason that this enforcement is getting so much attention is called money. And if I recall the council meeting last week, you revised all the building fees
Dan, can
and
you wrap up
safety
here?
fees to come more in line with the cost so you could do cost recovery.
Thank you, Dan.
And that takes away safety and is a total fiscal issue.
Thank you, Dan.
I have a question for
John, okay, Councilor Monahan has a question for you.
I was interested in your statement about changing a water heater without a permit, making your home,
The way this reads is, if you do any modification, including replacing a water heater, you have to have a permit. If you do anything that is in violation of the property maintenance code, that makes your building substandard.
have you ever changed a water heater without a permit?
Have I?
Yeah.
Years ago.
You don't have to answer.
Have I? Have you?
You don't have to answer that.
Water heaters and batteries, you rent them, okay?
Okay,
You replace one every 3 to 10 years.
okay.
But that is what's in the code.
I'll withdraw the question.
It makes criminals
Dan?
out of everybody who does anything themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dan, we'll address that when we're done with all the comments here. John Jones, followed by Deborah Schreiber.
Good evening again, Mayor and members of council. In the I had sent you earlier today our copy of the newsletter, street paper, and it started with a quote from Philip Mangano, the executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, where he said, "There may be many ways into homelessness, but there's only one way out, and that's to find a place to live." So I think it's extremely important, as our city takes a more proactive approach to enforcement of the state's minimum housing standards, any potential adverse impacts on the availability of housing is recognized and addressed. Ideally, the policy the city sets up and follows can have a positive impact, and I believe tonight's recommendations can have that positive impact. I do have one question on the staff report, which includes the concept of affordable housing, rental housing preservation program, with the report indicating that the funding source would be from administrative citation net revenues. Is that the only source, or is that one source? Question. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Deborah Schreiber? Oh, okay. Brian Lee Rensher. Brian will be followed by Laura Swenson.
Brian Lee Rensher, Ventura. I guess the council's newfound desire to provide decent housing is to be commended, as evidenced by the previous vote. But apparently most communities in California have been so poor at providing affordable housing that the state took control of, like, the granny flats and made them ministerial as opposed to discretionary. And I ditto Camille Harris's comments in regards to this amnesty. It's not an amnesty. But let's get to this, the root of what I want to say. Loans will be administered via community development similar to the city's existing housing preservation program. Funding for these loans will be administrative citation net revenues. Translated, those that stand on the poop deck will be funded by those that we hang from the yard arm. So obviously it's another 911 tax. What we're going to do is we're going to hang our neighbors so that we can help others. It's just another tax. That's all it is. And we're going to sacrifice our community's well-being so that we can make it better. We had to burn the village to save it.
Thank you, Brian. Laura Swenson, followed by Denise Oliveris.
Okay, I am a property